Welcome to an edition of Minot Matters here at the Dakotan. I'm joined by one of the most interesting presenters, and I mean that. I'm not saying that just because you're sitting here. You're one of the most interesting presenters from the city. Always enjoy it when you present something because there's so much depth to it. That's why it's interesting. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we jump into some will find it boring, I'm sure, but I think it's pretty exciting. The numbers and all that we're going to go into. Tell us a little bit about Dave Lakefield. Like, what do you enjoy doing? Who are you away from numbers and digits and decimals and commas? And
I have lots of hobbies, expensive hobbies, unfortunately. So, my wife and I have a place at Lake Metagoshi, and my family's had that place since I was a kid. So we enjoy spending a lot of time up there working on projects. We've taken up golf the last few years, I don't claim to be any good at it, but I can still have fun. It's just a good way to get out and enjoy some summertime in North Dakota, and we enjoy the course up there. It fits well with lake activities, so we do a lot of that. And I also have a motorcycle habit that I like to partake in.
So you're right. Very expensive hobbies.
Yeah, unfortunately. So.
But golf, that's a good one. I enjoy golf as well. I'm terrible at it. It's great family time though.
Absolutely, and my kids both golf. And when I started getting back into it with a friend that we spent a lot of time with at the lake, my wife said, I think I want to try that too. And I said, great. So it's a lot easier when she wants to come with and spend time with you.
Right.
Doing that as well. It's a lot easier to get away. So
exactly.
We have a lot of fun.
So you used to be in the private sector, and then you decided to join the city. Obviously, there's some of it that's probably a career path and all that, but did just being involved in the city and having an impact that you do have, did that play into that decision at all, or was it simply a career choice, or how'd that work?
Yeah, I kind of took a roundabout road. I worked for the city years ago, 25 years ago. I was a police officer for about 8.5 years, and I went into the private sector. I had gone back to school for accounting and business, went into the private sector in an accounting role, and then went on my own, operating a tax preparation franchise for a number of years. And I had taught some college classes along the way and had some contacts through that. And, still some folks that I knew at the city, and getting ready for tax season. One December, I got a random call from a recruiter wondering if I might be interested. So this job wasn't on my radar screen at all at that point. Yeah. But they intrigued me, and I reached out to Cindy Hemphill at the time and talked to her a little bit about the job, and so we went from there, and here we are.
Here we are. Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's something different every day, and sometimes that's unfortunate.
Right.
But there's always something that we're learning new or new technology and those types of things. So we're always changing things up a little bit.
That's true.
You think accounting, you think boring type of stuff, but there's always things changing for us, and we have a lot of things going on at the city, and trying to stay ahead of that can keep us busy. Yeah,
because so my brother's an accountant, and he's a great dude, but I mean, when you're talking about just straight up tax preparation, I feel like it's fairly boring. You're doing routine stuff over and over, essentially, right? Study up on the tax code that year, and then it's just a bunch of the rinse and repeat. But for you guys, you have dynamics such as the actual revenue portion, where the property taxes, the sales tax, you have all the different revenue streams that you guys are trying to manage. You guys have a massive 200, and I say massive not as a stone, but I'm saying it's a large budget that you guys are managing with federal grants and all these other things that you have to make sure that you are meeting the requirements of. So there's a ton of stuff that you guys are managing beyond just profit and loss and stuff like that.
Yeah, we have 2 generational projects currently underway in Minot with NAS and the flood control project. So huge infrastructure projects. That also means very expensive. So that's something that we have to address all the time. But when we're looking at these types of things, in the different rules that we have to follow, common sense can get you, quite a ways down that path too.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't think that should be right, it's probably not.
Right.
So common sense comes into play. We have a great staff. The staff in my department is fantastic, and we've gone through a technology upgrade in the last few years, and they've embraced that and have done very well with it. And we're always looking at ways we can improve on things too. And when we took on that technology project, I said, I don't want us to get it in place and then, wash our hands of it and be done. And that's the way it's going to be for 30 years.
Right. That's good.
We've been able to follow up on that and continue to come up with ways to improve on that. And I think that's critical as well. So.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Sometimes that's a fear. You guys actually do have a team. How many people are part of that team?
You're going to put me on I think it's about 16 in the finance department.
Wow. That's crazy. And it's necessary. So I battle. Okay. So I have battles because like some of these things are crazy, but then you also have people in the public that are casting stones as you point stuff out. So I think it's necessary, and it's also crazy how much it takes to effectively run a city. All right. So we have a few things that are on the topic list today. And so let's dive into them. First, let's go over the budget process. This is something that is launching here soon, and probably it's talked about that it basically launches as soon as the previous year's budget is passed, but the public is going to start have the opportunity to be more involved in the budget process here soon. What does this process look like for your guys' team?
So right now, just last week, we finished up with having our auditors, independent auditors on site doing field work. So we get them through and answer their questions and have them look at last year's books, and we're already looking towards budget season. So on Monday's city council meeting, we will have an agenda, a budget schedule that we will have that the council will approve. And, we're not carving that in stone, but we try to get that out early on. So council members and members of the public and staff know when the key dates are. So unfortunately it goes through the summer, so everyone has vacations. So we try to work around vacations, and we try to keep it so we keep as much of that business on a regularly scheduled council meeting as possible. There are going to be a few special meetings that we have along the way.
Okay.
Just because some of the topics are very important and we want to have time dedicated to that discussion. So we're not rushing through at the end of a meeting and just trying to get done with the meeting because it's getting late in the evening. So we have some of those that we have called out as well. So we can take the time to dedicate towards that.
Absolutely. When there's an audit that's happened, if I asked you how many hours, you wouldn't be able to answer it because I'm sure it's a ridiculous amount. But like when we're talking, this is like weeks of preparation that's going on here, right? Like how much, I understand the long term of games, but what I'm trying to ask is leading into the process before the public gets involved, before we start having these meetings, before we start having 5-hour city council meetings going over budget stuff, and then the special budget walkthroughs that are going to happen at different sites and things like that. Your team has already put in weeks of preparation just to get us to this point.
Absolutely. And right now I'm working on revenue projections. So things like sales tax. And typically if I do a presentation to the council, I almost always show the sales tax collections and how volatile they are. So we're in April. We have collection numbers from February at this point. So now we're trying to forecast that out through the end of 2026.
Gotcha.
So, we make changes to these things as we go because we have better information or better insight, but we're looking at a lot of historical data to extrapolate what we think the forecast will be. But we also have to keep an eye on what's going on nationally and regionally and the economies. We're still an ag and energy state. So if all of a sudden it's super dry and we know that the crops might not be as good as they have been in prior years, that can have a huge impact on us and our sales tax numbers. And, we have to be able to plan accordingly for that. So it's a little bit, science and knowledge and using computers to help us, but it's a little bit crystal ball too.
Yeah,
just
basically a magician.
What we think is going to happen. So
yeah, that's crazy. What are we hear sales tax, we hear property tax. Those are the two main revenue streams that the city has. Is there anything else that you guys balance it? Other than like grants, I understand that there's federal grants, state money for flood projects and the larger projects. But as far as the actual more to make the city run, we're looking at sales tax and property tax.
Actually, and I think I had it in one of my slides, that the sales tax portion, the property tax portion funds just a little over 10% of our budget.
Okay.
So between sales tax and property tax, it's about a quarter of the overall budget.
Right.
So the rest is either through charges for services or other types of revenue, state aid, federal funding for capital projects. We have a lot of federal funding that goes through the airport and transit departments. So about a quarter of it is actually local sources with sales tax and property tax.
That makes sense. Okay. So, and you get to stay out of all the fun politics of everything of is property tax better than sales tax and all the different conversations that go on about that. But one of the things that you have to pay attention to is the idea of providing a cap on property tax, because this would have an effect on your job substantially. We're hearing a cap could be 2%, could be 3%. Legislators are still working all that out, and the credit probably doesn't really affect your budget process, but this cap does. So when you hear this cap, and as we've seen stuff come out, how is this going to affect? Let's start here, because there's going to be effect on the budget, and then there's going to be effect on residents. And while there may be overlap that will affect differently, and we'll go into both sides, but mainly the budget. How does this cap actually affect a city budget that we're seeing prospectively? Because obviously it's not set in stone, and there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I think the difficult part right now is not having it finalized.
Right.
So, and I know we talked before we came on the air here that I had done a slide in my presentation at the last council meeting, trying to outline what the legislation was at that point.
Yep.
And I think there have been some amendments that have been proposed to that legislation since then. And there's multiple bills that are still in play at the legislature. So the purpose of this slide was to kind of give a range of what it might look like. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a moving scale here yet too, but the rough math at this point is somewhere between about 950,000 and 5.5 million that would be available under the caps that were proposed at that time at 3%.
That's a drastic range.
It is. And part of that is because the legislation has a look back period. Okay. And in the current budget that we're in, we had used some reserves to essentially buy down the mill levy for this year. So that would still be within the look back window. Mm-hmm. So we could go back and claw that back if needed. So one of the things that this is brought to our attention or is kind of forcing us to do is we need to look further out into the future. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about implementing a process where instead of building 1 year budget or two, that we have to go at least 3 years out, so we can always balance what we have coming in year 3 versus what we have in the look back window for the property taxes, and balancing that out. And obviously we want to keep this kind of on an even keel and not have, high taxes 1 year and then drastically cut the next year. It's slow and steady is probably a lot better. So, and it's a balancing act, balancing what the level of service versus what it costs to provide those services. And that's, partly what we listen to the public input and why we do surveys, and the city council members have their say and guidance on mm-hmm. where we need to be with that. And that's what we try to work towards in the development of the budget.
Right. So do you have a concern, and maybe if you don't want to comment on this, that's fine. Do you have a concern about the cap, just seeing how the budget has been in previous years? The increases, I understand that within a budget, you can always cut something. And I also understand if you cut something, then something should suffer or potentially has it. Will Minot have a problem if we have a 3% cap or 2% cap? Are we going to run into problems, do you see, from a budget side?
In the short term, I'm going to say no. Yeah. We're fairly well positioned. Long term is what's difficult to predict.
Yep. Right.
The key is if we continue to have growth every year,
I see.
That helps alleviate that. If we have a period of high inflation like we did, 2 years ago, when we have 8 or 9 or 10% inflation and a 3% cap becomes problematic.
Right. Yeah,
if we don't see a corresponding increase in growth, then it's a challenge for us.
it makes sense. But because basically what you're saying is like if inflation is, just use crazy numbers, if inflation is at 7%, which would be sky high, but inflation is at 7% when you're capped at 3%, then just to provide the same services as we did last year without growth, which we'll touch on that in a minute, it would be almost impossible to do that. You would have to cut something in order to be under the cap. Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a big part of what we deal with is people.
Yeah.
Staff. So, there's only so much other stuff we can cut without touching the people that provide the services. Yeah. So that becomes a real challenge. And not only that, just taking care of the people that we currently have.
Right. If inflation is at 7% and you're giving raises at 2%, then there's going to be potentially some unhappy employees that are going to be looking at other jobs. And typically when somebody's let go, the cost of the wage that you're going to present to the next person is going to be the same or greater because the market has increased. Okay. So let's talk about the new growth part about this though, because there's this idea that, there's a cap and your total property taxes cannot increase by more than 3%. That's not true, basically. Because the new growth the cap does not apply to new growth in your property tax formula.
That's correct. It's 3% plus whatever came on in the form of new growth.
So this is my question then, and I understand I'm putting you in a hot seat right here, okay? So because this is all speculative still, and I just want to make sure that that's clear because none of this is put into law, and we don't even know, perhaps this all fails and property tax stays the same. This is very speculative. If I have a $100,000 house, I made $30,000 worth of improvements to the house in 1 year. It now assessed just straight up $30,000 more at $130,000. Basically, how would the cap affect my property tax increase year over year?
That's going to depend. And that's kind of my standard answer because there's a lot more variables than just your house and what the mill rate is. Yep. Because we also have to take into consideration what the value of your house is in relation to the total value in the rest of the city and what other construction has been out there too. So it doesn't always equate to that, well, my house went up in value 30%, that means I'm going to get a 30% increase in my tax bill. Yeah. That you can't really connect those dots. There's a lot more to the math than that.
So more specifically, how does the from what you guys are seeing, how does the 3% cap affect that? If I make improvements to my house, can my property taxes increase by more than the capped amount because there was actually something done to increase the value of the house? Is that considered new growth, basically? And
that's my understanding is whatever would come on in the form of additional construction. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if that's the case, yes, your individual property wouldn't be taxed at 3%. Mm-hmm. It's 3% on the dollars overall at the city. So, for example, I think our property tax levy was just over 24 million last year. So we take the 3% of that, but then we spread that over the total value in the city. So depending on how the value of your house is in relation to the rest of them, you might go up by more than 3% or you might be less than 3%.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's what makes it, that makes it a different conversation for a different day of how that cap will actually affect things. Interesting stuff though. All right. So let's do something. We've done this before. You probably have seen it. But let's go ahead and get some rapid fire questions thrown your way. Okay.
I can't wait.
You can't wait. Well, you've probably already heard me say they're going to be all trick questions. So they're not, but do you love or dread budget season?
I look forward to it.
Okay. That's awesome. I love that. This one's so obvious, but Excel, Google Sheets, or some other, software that fulfills that role?
Excel for sure.
Yeah.
With budgeting, our new software that we have, it's a Tyler product. So we do a lot of our work in that ERP system, but it interacts well with Excel. So definitely Excel. Yeah. And we're just dipping our toe in the water with Power BI now too. So
some complicated softwares that I hope I don't ever have to use. Morning meetings or afternoon meetings?
I sit in meetings all day long, so I'm going to say morning would be my preference.
So how does that work in your position? Obviously, managerial position. And so, do you guys have to show up to city council meetings and stuff like that? I mean, you basically do. You speak almost every one.
Yeah, I think generally they want all department heads to be present.
Okay.
There's some exceptions to that if you don't have items that are on the agenda or something else is going on. But I try to be at every council meeting because so much of what we do as a city involves the finance part of it. That even if it's not my agenda item, I sometimes get involved in the discussion. So I try to be at every single one. There's sometimes typically vacation comes into play.
Right.
So, the comptroller or treasurer stand in and they're more than capable. So
Jenna,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
She does
She's
awesome.
the comptroller. She's able to answer the questions and I always tease her a little bit. She's a savant when it comes to numbers. She can remember numbers. If she called you on the phone today, she'd be able to remember your phone number next week. So
that's crazy.
She's fantastic. So.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting piece right there. We're going to have to start a Dave tracker on our city council recaps to see which ones you speak at, which is almost every week, as you said. Coffee or tea?
I like both, but lately coffee.
Okay. Is it just black or is there a certain
Typically
concoction?
just black. Yep.
Most used office supply?
Sticky notes. I'm kind of a note kind of guy.
Yeah. That's fair. Tacos or burgers?
Oh man, I like both too. I'm gonna say burgers.
Once a year, you guys have that city employee appreciation week. You guys get the food trucks and whatever. Is there any food truck that you prefer, like that you look forward to? Not prefer, but you look forward to?
I missed out on the one they had last year, but I like to try something new once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm not a big seafood person, so seafood is not my first choice, but I like trying some different things.
Did you ever try out worst case scenario? Did you ever have a chance when they were a food truck? Now they're established. Okay. I enjoyed that place. They had some good bratwurst. Still do. Favorite part of the job?
I don't know. There's lots of things I really like and lots of challenges, but I mean, I think I like the ability to, kind of help steer the direction of the city, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The planning aspect of things and trying to be a little bit of a problem solver as well. And that's kind of a big part of our role is trying to make things fit. So
moving out of the rapid fire questions, you make a great point there. When you signed on, obviously a recruiter reached out, you decided to actually pursue it. Did you anticipate the impact that you would actually make when you were looking to sign on? Because you do make an impact on city council meetings and on the direction of the city.
I don't know if I really thought about that at the time.
Yeah.
I think at the time I'd had some different experiences in the accounting world. I didn't know how it was going to equate to the governmental accounting world because that's kind of its own set of rules. And fund accounting, it's a little bit different. So, I was more concerned about whether or not I was going to be able to tackle that.
Yeah, right.
And, so I had reached out to Cindy Hemphill and asked for some guidance, and expressed that, and she encouraged me to at least give it a shot. So, and again, that's kind of where it comes back with having a strong staff and finding folks that can complement your skills as well and help you along the way too. And a lot of what I do in today's world is the planning meetings side of things. And, so I tend to get involved in a lot of the community discussions and also with different departments. I don't do that much accounting stuff.
Yeah. It makes sense. More leadership role. Yeah. We saw you at, three neighborhood meetings. I saw you at 3. I didn't attend every single one. I missed one, but I believe I saw you at 3. So you attended a lot of those areas where you're talking about being in that leadership role type stuff. 40-hour work week?
No.
He just says no. Yeah. Is that like 60?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on, I track my time.
Okay.
And we have ADP software, even though I'm an exempt position and a lot of my staff are exempt. I encourage them to track the time.
Yeah.
And it's, meant more for data to have for staffing analysis, so that down the road, if we, say we need some more help, we have data to back it up.
I see.
And rather than me just saying we're busy.
Right.
So
that's what I say.
Yeah.
See, that's the go-to word, but that's a really great point. That's something that an accountant would think of. All right. So let's move into the budget process. We're coming to a close, but let's move a couple more things in the budget process. And as we look at the it's 26 budget. I was thinking of the 2 years. Are there any projects that we are going to anticipate ending? Obviously, we have the flood project that's continuing to go. I don't know of any or any projects that are ending at NAS. We're getting close on. What are some of the things that you are looking at in the 2026 budget that kind of stand out?
Obviously, NAS and flood control are big capital projects. Something that we're implementing this year is a vehicle equipment replacement fund.
Okay.
Which is a little bit different way of looking at how we procure equipment, vehicles, loaders, maintainers, those types of things. So the idea is to centralize that purchasing and then collect enough funding. So eventually we have a pool that allows us to sustain those replacements over time.
Yeah.
So the implementation of that is a little bit tricky because you still have to provide the equipment they need. And so there's an upfront cost, but then you're also trying to, cost that out over its life cycle. So there's that cost that comes through too. So it's a little front heavy.
Yeah.
So, hopefully that is offset at some point by being more efficient at this and looking at, different ways to utilize equipment, and can we get by without pieces of equipment or share things or come up with a better way of doing that. So that's a huge challenge for us, and efficiencies are also going to be something that we really need to focus on.
It seems like that what has come up in past city council meetings is balancing like rent versus own options like that. And it's interesting how that plays differently for a city, for an organization like that, than it does for, in your personal budget. Almost 9 out of 10 times owning is the preference, right? But for the city, when you're talking about the types of equipment that you guys use and things like that, it's not always true. When you balance the cost out, it appears, and obviously it seems like politics plays a decision in almost every single decision that's made, even when it comes to money. But it seems like when you look at it on paper, it's not always true that owning is the best option for a city, just because of the replacement cost on the types of equipment that you guys use and stuff like that. And so that's basically kind of what this is looking at, is trying to make sure that we're more proactive in that area. Is that a little bit true?
Yeah, we're trying to look at a total cost of ownership type of scenario over its life cycle.
Yeah.
So not just what it costs to get that equipment, and how long can we hang on to that before we have to replace it again, and try to forecast out what the replacement cost will be.
Yeah.
And to plan for that. So it's always a challenge. In the past, we've bought equipment up front. We've done leases. Yeah. We've done all kinds of different things, just depending on the economics at the time. Mm-hmm. When interest rates were really low, leases were very attractive.
Right.
We could lease it, and the cost of the funds were less than what the expected inflationary costs were. So it made sense to buy it sooner and spread the cost over years instead of saving up and waiting and buying it at the end. So now with the rise in the interest rates, that isn't so true anymore. So it's a different way of looking at it in today's world.
Yeah. So what happens to all the money on your guys' side? What happens to all the money? Say we have just flat numbers, $20 million budgeted, and we spend $15 million because we didn't get 3 foot of snow, and this and that didn't happen. $5 extra million. What happens to that?
So when I reference fund accounting, without getting too deep into this because it gets confusing.
Sweet.
But our largest operating fund is the general fund, and the general fund is exactly what its name says. You can use that money for generally anything, right? Sweet. So it's our it's our least restrictive fund that we have. So in your example, if those funds were budgeted in the general fund, it would stay in that fund at the end of the year. The appropriation would lapse, and that money would be available to be used in the upcoming budget cycle.
And So on that, if I am a specific department, okay, and I only used 50% of my budget, then at the end of the year, I lose that money, correct? Because that just goes to the general fund, like you're saying.
That is correct.
Yeah, interesting. See, those are the things. All right. So first off, as you have been able to tell throughout the interview, I just kind of admire what you do because it's all confusing to me. So we're working to understand it. But it's incredible to see. All right. Well, any parting words of wisdom that you have for us as we kind of go into this 2026 budget cycle and in general?
No, I don't think so. I just encourage the citizens to be involved. At least now they can tune in and watch things online, and it's easier to see what's going on than ever. I think we make a concerted effort to be transparent in what we're doing and ask questions if they have questions. And I'm not going to guarantee I'm always going to have the answer off the top of my head, but we'll certainly try to respond and answer questions. And just, if they have concerns or thoughts, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. You walked in with the Harley coat on. You said that you're enjoying any big trip. I know you guys, when you're a Harley driver, it seems like you guys just like to drive somewhere. Doesn't even have to be to any place. Any cool trips that aren't like
I have a group of guys that we've gone to Talladega for the NASCAR race in April, and the weather's always iffy.
Yeah.
And, we're anticipating being pretty busy. So we're talking about maybe changing that up this year and going to Kansas City or someplace a little bit closer. And it's a couple weeks later, so the weather might be a little better.
Perfect. Yeah.
So it's still a little bit up in the air. Always go to Sturgis. So that's kind of a staple in August. So that's one of the meetings that I struggle with because that's always the first week in August.
I see.
That's usually a conflict on a council night, but I have been known to tune in from South Dakota
you're that
by
good.
teams. So
you're that good. It's got to be interesting being part of a council via teams. Well, thank you for coming on today. It's been a good discussion as we learned just a little bit more about the budget. I think for me, it's still a lot of Greek, but I know a little bit more. So that's good. I really appreciate how you break stuff down though and make it understandable here and at council meetings. So thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching this episode of Minot Matters here at the Dakotan. Hope you like and subscribe, become part of the Dakotan community as we continue to bring you information about and around Minot. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.